Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share park ranger horror stories. First story. I found a cave while working as park ranger. I was out on a routine job patrolling a remote area of the park when I saw it. The small but unmistakable opening of a cave. Since it wasn't on any of the maps, and it was my job to check things like that out, I wasted no time in taking out my flashlight and heading towards the smaller but manageable cave opening that was wide enough for me to step through without having to crouch down. The cave was situated in a clearing close to a pond. The opening was located right in the middle of a wall of sandstone and was fairly unremarkable looking. No sign that it was dangerous or out of the ordinary. Since the opening was barely wide enough for several people to step through, that meant the cave had never been turned into a mine. There was also no garbage lying around or any other traces of recent human activity. So for all I knew, I was the first human being to set foot in this cave in who knows how long. The feeling came with a sense of exhilaration I'd never felt before. So I took a deep breath, switched on my extra-strength flashlight, and steadily started walking inside. My first few steps in the cave were beyond cautious. Aside from the fact I'd never been here before, the terrain was very steep. You could feel it slowly descending further into the earth. Since I didn't want to lose my footing and go tumbling down, I kept casting the flashlight beam around. Because despite the intense, glaring light it provided, the darkness in the cave was unlike anything I had ever seen before. I'd been in the forest at night many times, but this far exceeded that. This darkness was dense. After enough careful steps, the descent became smoother and the floor leveled out. The cave floor itself was rough in some spots and smooth in others. You could tell where the elements had weathered away parts of the land and made a smoother path to walk. The temperature had also dropped significantly down here, and I could now see the many impressive stalactites and stalagmites dotting the cave. The rough descent had been replaced by a fairly even path straight forward, but there wasn't a ton of space to walk around here. A small group of people could squeeze through, but no more than that. My boots occasionally crunched on gravel, but apart from that, the cave floor was empty, almost uncannily clean. Seeing how untouched the cave was, it can't help but make you feel like an insignificant speck in the vast scheme of the universe. The cave was not only far older than I was, it would be here long after I was gone. Especially because the cave seemed endless. The more I explored, the more I got the sense that I was making no progress at all. A look at my watch told me I'd been down there for about an hour when the narrow path opened into a massive chamber, and the sight made me gasp. The entire space was filled with water, and the walkway served as a makeshift bridge to the other side. The walls were rough-hewn and jagged virtually everywhere you looked. There had been plenty of impressive stalactites in the cave, but the ones dangling from the ceiling here were massive. So precise and sharp looking it seemed impossible that they had occurred naturally. Some of them were practically touching the water that filled the space. I had no idea how deep the water was, but in the thick darkness, it looked unnervingly deep. The walkway that went from one side of the cavern to the other got rougher here, but it still looked as steady and weathered as before. So, being more careful of where I stepped than ever, I slowly began to cross the cavern. I was almost halfway across when I heard the sound of a rock hit a cavern wall and splash into the water. The sound in the empty space seemed so uncannily loud, I almost jumped. Once I was sure of my footing, I carefully shined the flashlight around to check. There was nothing, no signs that anything at all had happened. But on this job, you learn that just because everything looks fine doesn't mean nothing is going on. The hair standing up on the back of my neck told me everything I needed to know. I didn't dare take another step forward. If anything, I was slowly adjusting my footing to turn back around. I was just about to go back the way I came when I heard it. The sound of whispered voices. At first, I had no idea what it was. I hadn't heard a single sound before now aside from my own footsteps. Ignoring the chill slowly washing over me, I slowly began to walk back across the cavern. I'm not sure if it was just my imagination, but as I did, the whispering got louder. The creepiest part was how the voice seemed faintly familiar. Not enough so I recognized it, but enough that it was unsettling. The worst part was that I had absolutely no idea where the voice was coming from. The acoustics of the cave made it seem like the voice was both everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I was almost completely across the cavern when I cast my flashlight around and saw it. There, on the left side of the cavern in the middle of the dark water, was a shadow. With my heart pounding in my chest and the grip on my flashlight slick from sweat, I carefully turned and aimed the beam directly at it. The water illuminated was a murky gray, but the shape was as dark as it had been without the flashlight. I had no idea what the shape was. It was completely solid, but it wasn't any sort of animal, and it didn't look remotely human. It just hung there, floating just below the surface. If there had been the slightest suggestion of human activity here, I'd say it was garbage, a blanket, or some clothing that fell in the water. But I knew that wasn't the case. The sight made my stomach clench, but then with my flashlight still aimed right at it, it disappeared. There was no movement or any disturbance in the water. It just vanished. That was my cue to leave. Once I was safely across the cavern and on solid ground, I ran out of there as fast as I could due to the numerous rock formations I had to maneuver around. It seemed to take an eternity. I periodically checked behind me to make sure there was nothing there. And while there never was, I could never shake the feeling that something was watching me. After what seemed like a painfully long time, I finally arrived back at the cave opening. Then came the difficult task of maneuvering what was essentially an uphill climb. By now, I was drenched in sweat, and the climb did nothing to help that. But taking care with where, and when I stepped, I eventually was standing at the mouth of the cave with daylight coming through. I gratefully walked out into the sunshine and looked down into the cave. As I did, I swear I saw a figure walk past on the cave floor below. But when I looked back, it was gone. Once I caught my breath, I radioed the cave discovery into the station, and some other rangers came out to check it out. One of them was my boss, Jack. I told them I didn't see anything, but one look at me and my demeanor told them something was up. Jack was no stranger to the unusual things park rangers can and do encounter on the job. So with him and the other two rangers listening, I told them what I saw and experienced down in the cave. When I was done, Jack sat there quietly for a moment. Doesn't matter if it's 2022 or 1822, things still go bump in the night, he said in his deep, steady voice. I don't disagree. I muttered. I'm sure you don't, Wade. I won't pretend I saw what you saw, but I believe you saw what you saw. Nature can be, and often is, a very scary place. No kidding. One of the other rangers agreed. There's a reason this cave looks so untouched by people. No sign of animals either. None. Jack shook his head at that. That's the sign something is off. Animals don't go near something. That means people shouldn't either. So we'll mark this cave as dangerous, go back to base, and log the find. Now let's get out of here. Second story. Why I'm no longer a park ranger at the Spruce Ridge National Park. When the call about the missing campers and the abandoned campsite came in, I was sitting in front of the park ranger station, watching a fire that crackled in the rusted old pit that's been here for decades. The flames were slowly eating the wood. The heat occasionally sputtered and spat as the pine logs were devoured. It's one of my favorite ways to pass the time out here. A fire, like watching fish in an aquarium or animals in a zoo, is endlessly captivating because it's a tiny bit of nature captured and put on display. The same reason people come here to the Spruce Ridge National Park. And just like a fire, the woods here can scorch you if you're not careful. I shuffled back inside, took the call, and headed out for the rendezvous point after listening to the report for a few minutes. Another couple gone missing. Nothing too out of the ordinary, at least not yet. So I loaded my gun, hopped in my Jeep, and headed out as the sun began to recede past the trees. The searing summer sun peeked out from between dense fir limbs that surrounded the rocky terrain on all sides, sweeping over the horizon as far as I could see. I passed glimmering ponds filled with algae and pavilions filled with brown picnic benches as the Jeep bounced up and down on carefully maintained blacktop and rutted brown roads filled with dirt and rock. I could practically hear the croak of frogs, the chirping of crickets, and the hum of a few dragonflies as I sped past. No matter how long I was a park ranger, I never got used to the thrill of the great outdoors. The serenity you could find in the fresh air was eternal, as was its sheer size. It reminds me of pioneer days when it was just a few families alone in the vastness of the frontier. And it was a very unforgiving frontier. Back then, there were no rangers or park security like me to make sure no families got lost. First aid didn't exist, and Mother Nature never suffered fools. Some people have forgotten that. But Mother Nature never hesitates to remind people about what she can do. Lately, she seems particularly active on that front in these parts. I carefully maneuvered the Jeep through hills, which were bigger the farther I got away from the base. The wind lashed through the cracked windows as I passed fallen cedar trees on the way to my destination. I love these woods, but I never forget how merciless they can be and how many people have met their end out here. How many bodies have been buried right here? How many people went out into these woods and simply never came out? There's no way of knowing for sure, but these woods have been around for centuries, and that's enough time for death to plant a seed for every tree out here. I was dispatched to find Libby and Dale Morrison, a well-to-do couple that had gone out on a camping vacation. Their empty campsite had been found by a group of hikers, and since no one had seen the couple for a few days, I was sent out to take a closer look. Funny enough, while I've always loved the outdoors, I've never liked camping. If you fill out enough missing persons and death reports, you learn fast to treat the woods like a tiger or lion. They might be stunning to look at, but never forget what can happen when you encounter them. Although plenty of people have wised up and learned how to camp safely, camping certain places alone is a bit like putting out a candy bowl on Halloween with a "please take one" sign with no one to watch. Not everyone who walks by has to ignore the rule and do whatever they please. All it takes is one. It may have only taken one person to make my brother-in-law Jerry vanish a few weeks ago. National parks seem so humdrum and tame, but anyone who works at one knows there's a lot of dark things that happen within those trees. Cults will meet here, drug deals go down and go wrong, people vanish, and plenty of murders all happen within these woods. Bodies are dumped here and found days, weeks, or even months later, all torn to pieces from the animals, and no coroner could figure out how they got that way. I've interviewed plenty of applicants who think this job is some cakewalk and an easy paycheck. They all get a nasty wake-up call sooner or later, and it either sobers them up or makes them run out of here like they've been chased out. And I've seen things that I don't blame them for wanting to run from. People have been afraid of monsters in the woods for centuries. I don't expect that to change anytime soon, no matter what modern technology exists. That's why the single best alarm system that ever existed is man's best friend. The minute a dog starts barking, you know someone or something is there. But when you're outside and your dog whimpers and runs away like the ground is on fire, that's your cue to get out. It's no coincidence that in all the time I've been on duty here, I've never had to deal with a situation where one or more person involved had a dog. Never. Back at the station that houses my office, there's an entire bulletin board with missing persons flyers. Most of them are couples or entire families. Wholesome looking, happy, and smiling at the camera, like they don't have a care in the world, which is usually how they end up on the wall in the first place. I was about to find out whether the Morrisons would join them. It's not a task I enjoy at all. In the 5 years I've had this job, I've taken off maybe 10 of those flyers. And not because the people on them were found safe and sound either. Most people on it are the type of people who think because they have GPS and cars with all the latest bells and whistles, there's nothing to worry about when you camp or venture into the woods. A lot of people who venture out here have that attitude. If they're lucky, they realize the mistake and live to talk about it. Other times, not so much, but maybe their fate can help teach others a lesson. I've certainly had to deal with my share of journalists, documentary filmmakers, law enforcement officers from various divisions, private investigators, and inquiring relatives and friends. The professionals I have no problem dealing with. They're just doing a job, same as me. That's not to say they don't take what happened seriously or feel bad for the parties involved. Not at all. But they're used to dealing with stuff like this for the most part, and it rarely touches them personally. Only rarely do I see the look in their eye that tells that what happened here will haunt them. On the other hand, dealing with family members in that situation is by far the worst part of my job. I'd rather stumble upon a million bodies than have to deal with grieving family members. I've done it too many times, but it never gets any easier. Never. And it shouldn't. It was dark by the time I arrived at the Morrison campsite, which was a long way from any main area. As expected, they had spared no expense and had gone camping with brand new gear that I was certain they had just bought. Brand new equipment, cooking gear, and a black SUV that was still gleaming like it was fresh off the lot. I did have to concede that Mr. and Mrs. Morrison picked a terrific spot, right on the lake. It was a clear night, and the moon glistened off the calm surface, which looked like glass. No matter what happened on the job, nighttime was always my favorite time to work or do anything else so long as I took proper precautions. I suppose it's the same reason people think about hitting up an old flame late at night. In the modern era, it's easy to look down upon more primitive times and their fears about what lay just out of sight in the darkness. But come out here at night, when it's pitch dark, and those fears suddenly become far more relatable. Modern technology may be the 21st century, but where your flashlight ends, it's the 19th century. All it takes is for your flashlight to run out of batteries, your GPS to fail, or your car to not start, and you're no longer in modern times out here. You're right back where your ancestors were. But at least they knew how to survive in conditions like that. As I looked around the campsite, the stars gleamed out of the sky and looked brighter than usual. I don't think people think about space, as in really think about it and what it entails. It's a stunning concept to behold. The vastness of the galaxy and all the galaxies beyond it. When you think about it, Earth is nothing more than a tiny apartment in a massive skyscraper when you think of how massive space is. The phrase outer space invokes gargantuan size and a scale that is unfathomable. When pondering this, the two most terrifying concepts in their implication are that you are completely alone in the universe, and you are not alone in the universe. Which one is more terrifying depends a lot on the person. The phrase in space, "No one can hear you scream," is so much more than a movie tagline. It's a simple fact, because not only can no one hear you scream, you might not even be able to scream, which is one of the most horrifying feelings a human can experience. It's like calling for an ambulance only to be told help isn't coming. The woods are the same way, as it's no coincidence they refer to space as the final frontier. It's also what makes someone going missing in a huge park like this such a nightmare for a search party. In a populated area, you can rule areas out and narrow things down, but out here in the woods, someone could be literally anywhere. The Morrison campsite wasn't torn to shreds like it had been attacked by a wild animal, nor did it resemble the scene of a horror movie-style bloodbath. It looked like countless campsites that had been abandoned without an afterthought. Had it not been for their car nearby, I would have thought they just left on a whim. Their car, a shiny black Cadillac SUV with a grill hood that gleamed in the light from my flashlight, was still here. So that meant they either left in someone else's car, they ran off somewhere outside the park, or they were still here. But it wouldn't be the first time I've seen couples ditch one vehicle out here to get in another. So the question was, what caused the Morrisons to flee from where they'd set up shop? It certainly wasn't because they needed to use a bathroom. In my experience, people almost always flee due to fear. But fear of what? I scanned the area slowly with my flashlight. The Morrisons certainly spared no expense. The RV was top of the line, certainly a step up from sleeping in a tent. You don't leave equipment like this for no reason, especially if you're someone with money. A quick check revealed that none of the car's tires had been slashed, and from all appearances it looked to be in good condition. Since the RV's front door was halfway open, I wasted no time in climbing the metal steps and peering inside. As expected, everything inside was top of the line. Most of it looked like they had just bought it at the store a week ago. I carefully climbed inside, and with one hand on my gun, I slowly checked the bathroom and bedroom. The bathroom was a jumbled mess of tubes and bottles, and the bed was unmade, but everything was perfectly in order. nor did it look like anything was stolen. I stepped back outside and started to walk towards my Jeep to radio what I had seen. But when I was over halfway there, the skin on my arms prickled and I felt a chill run down my back. Despite the billowing humidity, I was chilled to the bone. I took a deep breath, carefully placed one hand back on my gun, and carefully walked the remaining distance, taking care to keep my back aligned with the RV as I had the sense I was being watched. I had felt this sensation before, and you never get used to it. And just like dealing with grieving families, you shouldn't. Because if you do, the next grieving family may be yours. With paranoia and fear growing with each step, I mercifully made it to the Jeep okay and slammed the door shut. Before I radioed back to the base, I leaned back in the driver's seat and tried to relax. As I took another deep breath and reminded myself to remain calm, I surveyed the terrain again. No car tracks aside from mine or the Morrisons, no evidence of a struggle, and no sign of any other life out here. But that didn't mean nothing else was out here besides me. As if to answer me, a guttural roar burst out from the woods to my right, and I practically shot out of my seat. It was the ugliest sound I've ever heard, and there was no way a human was capable of making that noise. It was the kind of sound that seems to be a living, breathing, physical entity like thunder. Without waiting another moment, I started the engine, floored the gas pedal, and the Jeep roared to life as I drove out of there as fast as I could. As I pulled away, I swear I could see the trees where the roar came from tremble slightly. It wasn't until I had been driving for about 10 minutes that I noticed some heavy breathing that sounded pained. When I realized it was mine, I tried to take a deep breath and calm down. Once I had done the former and was attempting the latter, I picked up my radio with a clammy hand and called in what I found and heard. I was surprised, as my voice was far calmer than I felt. On the other line, my colleague sounded surprised but not skeptical. Maybe it was sincere, or maybe when I had backup and we all headed back there together, we might find nothing, and they might just declare me paranoid. I didn't really care either way. I'd much rather be called paranoid than a crime statistic. I rolled along at a good pace until I rounded a corner and a figure standing in the middle of the road made me slam on the brakes. In the harsh light from the vehicle's headlights, I could see the figure was slight, wearing badly tattered clothes, and was pretty beat up. But when the figure took a step forward, I couldn't believe it. It was my brother-in-law, Jerry. Jerry, I rolled down my window in shock. What the hell is going on? Bobby, we gotta go. Get in, I said before he ran unsteadily towards the passenger seat. The minute he sat down, I hit the gas, and we roared out of there. He panted for a good 30 seconds before his breathing evened out. What happened, Jerry? I asked after he had a chance to rest. There's something out here, Bobby. Some kind of creature. A monster. Like something out of a TV show. And there's this group of people that know about it and treat it like it's real important. They think it's so important they even kidnap people and offer it to the monster to eat. That's what happened to me. What kind of monster is it? It was the only thing I could think of to ask. I don't know. How did you get away? Remember that knife you got me for Christmas last year? The one you can store anywhere. That's right. I had it in my shoe at the time they grabbed me. Once I had a chance, I put it to good use. And here you are, saving my neck again. I'll never be able to repay you. His voice broke as he spoke. I always liked you, Jerry. Not like Tyler, Marianne's last boyfriend. The sentence was barely out of my mouth when the car went around a bend and I had to slam on the brakes again. But this time the sight was far more chilling, as the road was filled with people wearing identical monochromatic black plastic masks, the kind you get in bulk at a party store. They also wore plain black hooded sweatshirts with the hoods pulled up. No one moved an inch as I stopped. They all just stood there, facing me. All 25 of them. Then, almost on command, they all started walking at once towards my vehicle. That was the only cue I needed to start the car and run right through them. Or that was my plan before, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a blur of color and two of the masked people went flying and slammed into trees. When they landed, both of them were sporting deep scratches that were bleeding. This made the others stop immediately before they started to flee in opposite directions. But that wasn't enough because more of them fell prey to whatever was out there, which I couldn't see. Either way, I hit the gas harder than I ever had in my life, and it wasn't long before the screaming and wailing was a faint background noise. What's the matter? Jerry gleefully called out from the cracked window. Can't handle what you try to do to me? The two of us didn't say a word to each other until we reached the park ranger station. Gathered around the front were a few of my colleagues, but two of the people were dressed casually and matched the description of the Morrisons whose campsite I was sent to check out. My face must have showed my surprise because Mrs. Morrison walked over to me and shook my hand. Libby Morrison, paranormal investigator. My husband and I were investigating the rumors of strange occurrences out here, and we left the campsite abandoned in order to try to record what happened. Well, congrats, you found something, was all I said before I briefly explained what happened and left it to the professionals. Altogether, the bodies of 10 masked people were pulled from the park. The rest were rounded up by law enforcement and charged with various things. And while that was going on, I handed in my resignation while Jerry went home with my sister. I eventually got another job related to the outdoors, but this time it was job related to outdoor retail. Third story. I'm a park ranger. I found a strange well in the forest. When the third call came in, we knew we had a problem. They all described the same thing, a man in a black jacket following them at a distance as they hiked through the forest. The man didn't say anything. He had a hood pulled tight over his head. No one saw his face. All three sightings occurred up over the ridge to the west of the station. Someone had to go and take a look. Jim and I played a lightning game of rock, paper, scissors. It's like the man can read my mind. I clipped a radio to my belt and jumped in the truck. Hikers often report seeing something strange out in the forest. The dark spaces between the trees play tricks on the mind. That and the isolation. But 3 sightings within a week describing the exact same thing ruled out a simple case of imagination in overdrive. Someone was out there, the question was who and why. I rambled up the slope as far as the truck would take me and then jumped out. I still had to negotiate the worst part of the ridge. The slope gets steep in parts and is hell on your legs. It made me think, why has someone been spotted way up here on 3 different days across the space of a week? No one lived up this way. It wasn't a place for folk on a daily walk. A pang of fear gripped my stomach. Should I have come alone? I crested the slope and reached for my radio, and then I saw him. A silhouette mingling with the shadows between the thin trunks of birch. He was the length of a football field from me. Black jacket and a hood. He half-turned in my direction and took a step forwards. In a strange way, it gave me comfort. If there were any nefarious reason for him to be out here, I'd have expected him to retreat into the woods. Even at this distance, he couldn't fail to recognize my ranger uniform. As I came within a distance where I could call to him without yelling, I raised a hand in greeting. I strained to see his face, but a deep and dark shadow obscured his features. I opened my mouth to say hello, but before any sound came out, he turned and strode into the forest. I called after him, but he continued to thread his way through the trees. I skipped a few paces to bridge the gap between us. Within touching distance, I reached out and a strange sensation flowed through my fingertips. It felt like a controlled release of electricity, not painful, almost like a severe case of pins and needles. Before I could retract my hand, a brilliant light flooded my vision. I shut my eyes and covered them with my hands. Somehow the light shone through. I cried out and stopped dead in my tracks. And then the light was gone. I opened my eyes. I stood in a clearing. The sun streamed down through the gap in the trees. At the center of the clearing stood an old stone well, the walls extending up to about waist height above the ground. I had seen structures like this around town, relics of frontier times. That a well would be out here in the middle of the forest, far from any settlement past or present, was baffling. The man in black stood behind the well and motioned me toward it. I approached the well, adrenaline sending my heart into a frenzy. Why had he led me out here? The sun warmed my shoulders from above. Despite the bright sunshine, the man's face remained shrouded in shadow. He pointed to the well. I stopped a few paces short. Something about this wasn't right. Everything about this wasn't right. Did he mean to throw me down? A voice sounded in my head. It did not come via my ears, but seemed to somehow feed directly into my brain. You must look. I watched the man suspiciously and inched closer to the well. The mortar between the stones crumbled, and moss stained the outside face green. This well was old. I saw something strange on the inside face. Writing. Something carved into the stone. It read, "Truth lies at the bottom of a well." What truth? I peered down. The shaft was deeper than I expected. Black shadows shrouded the walls at the base. All was dark except a sliver of light reflecting off the water sitting at the bottom. The reflection shimmered as if tiny waves swept over the water. I lowered my head and squinted. An image appeared in the bottom like a movie projected onto a screen. The image sharpened and came into focus. The forest at night under a full moon. Mist mingled with the trees. I felt the cold. I did not imagine it, but felt it. My skin prickled and I shivered. A road snaked up through the forest. I recognized it. It is a few minutes north of the ranger station. A figure walked beside the road. He wore a black jacket, the hood pulled up over his head. It was the same man who led me out here. A set of headlights flickered through the trees and then came into focus. The man in black stuck out a thumb. The images cut to the inside of the car. For a moment, a bottle of whiskey obscured the identity of the driver. When the bottle lowered, it was Jim who appeared. Music blared from the radio. The revs on the dial pushed into the red. I turned away from the movie playing at the bottom of the well. This was madness. The man in black, the hitchhiker, pulled back his hood. His face was youthful and innocent, but there was something wrong. His skin wrinkled and pulled away from his eyes, revealing a ring of red around the perimeter. 2 black holes were where his nose should be. Blood poured from his mouth, and a few teeth were missing. The temple on the right side was caved in. I took a step back and cried out. I almost turned to run, but the hitchhiker held up his palms. He pointed down the well. I hesitated. The words repeated in my brain. You must look. My legs were jelly. My mind was torn. Part of me wanted to run and get as far away as possible, and the other part wanted to see what was down at the bottom of that well. I stepped forwards and looked down. The projection at the bottom of the well resumed. The bottle of whiskey slipped from Jim's grasp. One hand pulled and pushed the steering wheel as the other fumbled at his feet for the bottle. The truck drifted and then overcorrected. The man in black stood by the side of the road with his thumb outstretched, had no chance. The truck skidded to a stop. Jim breathed rapidly from behind the wheel. He searched the rear vision mirror and found a black lump at the side of the road. He turned to confirm what the mirror told him. He put the truck in gear and drove. He rounded the next bend and stopped. The road was quiet. He killed the headlights and reversed. Under the pale light of the moon, Jim dragged the hitchhiker off the side of the road and into the forest. He came to a gully and tumbled down the bank. Jim scrambled back up the slope and pulled the hitchhiker down. Jim paused for a moment at the bottom, watching the face of the hitchhiker before setting to work covering the body with branches and leaves. The moon grew and brightened until the light forced me to close my eyes. When I opened them, I was back in the forest. The clearing and the well and the man in the black jacket were gone. I walked back to my truck. I sat there for 15 minutes before starting the engine and driving back. I searched the parking lot for Jim's truck. It wasn't there. Jim narrowed his eyes when he saw me. I didn't blame him. I was white as a sheet and knew it. He asked me what I saw, and I told him nothing. I stammered a question about his truck. He paused and licked his lips and told me it was in the shop. I told 2 lies the following morning. The first was to our boss. I told him we'd had another call about a man in a black jacket, and that Jim, and I would take a look. The second was to Jim. I told him we had a report of a tree down on a walking trail, and we had to go clear it up. We got in the truck. I took the road I saw in the vision at the bottom of the well. I knew the curve. When you take a road every day, you get to know it almost to a point you could drive it with your eyes closed. I stopped right at the spot where Jim had smashed into the hitchhiker. Jim looked over at me confused. Which walking trail were we going to? His hand shook. I got out of the truck and instructed him to follow. We were taking a shortcut. I had to see it for myself. If what I had seen in the well was the truth, then the boy might still be there in the gully where Jim left him. And I had to know if it was Jim, and the only way to do that was to have him there. To see the look on his face. To see it in his eyes that it was him. Jim fell behind, and I barked at him to keep up. We were almost at the gully. I turned back, and Jim had stopped. He implored me to turn back. I kept going. The gully fell away below my feet. At the bottom, partially hidden below a stack of branches, was a figure wearing black. I shouted back to Jim. I told him something was down there. He begged me to stop. I unclipped the radio from my belt and called it in. Jim's shoulders fell. He ran a hand through his hair. He searched the slivers of sky visible through the trees for answers. For a split second, his mouth turned downwards like a child about to cry. I had him, but a moment later all fear left his face. He sighed. He strode confidently to the crest of the gully and looked down. He told me I was right and that there was something down there. I searched his eyes. I looked for guilt. I saw only Jim, the guy who worked at the desk on the other side of the partition. How could he be so calm? How could he not break down and confess? The police came and retrieved the body. They identified the hitchhiker, an 18-year-old runaway escaping an abusive father. 2 officers interviewed me in a small room. I told them we had found the body by accident. They found it strange we had reports of a man matching the hitchhiker's description from the last week. I agreed, but I could not explain it. There was no way I could tell them about the well and what I saw on the bottom. I only told them that I thought it was strange that Jim suddenly didn't have his truck. This produced furrowed brows. I only repeated that I wanted them to look into it. Whether the police investigated or not, I cannot say. Jim's truck never resurfaced. He says he sold it. The death was classified as an accident and no suspect or witness was ever identified. I know the truth, and so does Jim, but I can't prove it. I still sit at the desk on the other side of the partition. If it plays on Jim's mind, he never gives anything away. One night, I left a note in his letterbox that said, "I know it was you." He has never mentioned it. I see the hitchhiker in my dreams. The headlights from Jim's car lighting his face in the last moments of his life. There is nothing I can do for him. Sometimes I go out to the forest and search for the well. I have not seen it since. Sometimes the truth lies just out of reach, and sometimes it seems so far away it could be down at the bottom of a well. 4th story. I was a park ranger at a national park. I will never forget this horrific night. It all started a few years ago. It was your run-of-the-mill, boring shift at the office. I worked the night shifts, and our staff was pretty small, so there was usually only 1 or 2 other rangers working with me. But on this specific night, I was alone. I yawned and looked at the clock. It read 3 a.m. Only a few hours to go. Suddenly, I heard a branch crack outside. Like the paranoid person I was, I instantly tensed up and began to slightly panic. You're being crazy, it's just an animal or something. My paranoia returned twofold once I heard another branch breaking. I knew it was most likely nothing, but I got up and made sure the door was locked, and then I looked out the window, scanning the area for anything suspicious. I took a deep sigh of relief when the answer was affirmative. Upon sitting down, I swore I could hear the faintest footsteps coming from outside the office. So faint that they could have been in the back of my mind, but then they grew louder, and there was no doubt that they were real. The footsteps seemed to be getting louder and closer by the second, and they sounded like no normal animals or humans. I tried to distract myself by playing some games on my computer, but the paranoia was becoming too much to ignore. I jumped when I heard the horrific sound of screeching nails on one of the back office windows. I got up and quickly made my way to the window, only to find a long, red scratch mark. My stomach threatened to empty itself at the sight. Usually I like being alone at the night shift, but at this moment I wished I had another coworker with me. I heard another scratching noise, this time coming from the window closest to my desk. I ran out of the room and watched as 5 terrifying nails slowly scratched their way down the window, leaving the same red mark. I spent the next half hour sitting in my chair shaking and teeming with intense anxiety, hearing the scratching sound every so often. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and looked at the first window. It was totally and utterly covered with red scratch marks. There was absolutely no seeing out of that window. I checked every other window, and it was the same for all of them. I sat back down and looked at the clock. It was now 4 a.m., meaning there was only around an hour until dawn. 5th story. Another park ranger just told me his scariest story. It was one of those late nights on the job, but that didn't bother me at all. In fact, it was one of my favorite parts of being a park ranger. Hanging around late at night, with just a few of my fellow rangers in the middle of the woods, it was just like huddling around a campfire while you told stories. Except we were indoors around a fireplace. It was the middle of spring, but it had been cold lately, so while the afternoons were pleasant, the nights had been chilly. which was why we were all inside gathered around a fire while on the clock. The ranger station was beyond comfortable with a fire, so I was contentedly sitting in one of the many leather couches facing it. We were all midway through a shift, and like many nights on the job, it was quiet, so we got to talking about nothing in particular. There's nothing like the natural flow of an unplanned conversation. Outside, the evening had slowly given way to night, and the darkness had settled upon the woods with its usual silent thoroughness. The area may be a park during the day, but at night, it was the woods. Parks inherently sound fun and brings to mind cookouts, whereas the woods has an inherently spooky vibe. There were 4 of us sitting by the fire in the ranger station on that chilly night. Me, Harland, Anthony, and Craig. Craig had just finished talking about his cousin's wedding when Anthony asked Harland what his scariest story was from working here all these years. Usually, Harland just chuckled and said he'd heard some crazy things over the years. But not this time. This time, he sat there quietly for a moment before he said, "The Witch of Blackthorn Creek." That was when we all went completely still. If we were just like people huddled around a campfire, Harland was the one in charge of building the fire. He was the ranger we always deferred to. He'd been on the job long enough to have earned that right. Harland's family had also been in the area for generations, so if anyone had any stories to tell about what may have happened here, it was him. Plus, he was a terrific guy. Hard-working and beyond helpful when you needed something. So when someone like Harland tells you he's heard of a story like that, you listen intently, especially with the tone of voice he used. Serious and no nonsense, without a trace of amusement. The Witch of Blackthorn Creek, Harland began in a clear voice as we all gave him our full attention. The story was first told to me by my Uncle George, who had been a lumberjack for years. According to him, people said there was a curse on the land, which was placed there by a witch. It all started one year when the harvest went bad. Since there had been nothing but plentiful harvests every year, it made people beyond suspicious. There was barely enough grain and stuff to get through winter. It didn't help matters that the town had generally been prosperous, but had recently started to go through some financial difficulties. Then, numerous bits of misfortune happened within the community over the years. Houses burning down, people going missing and never being found again. Periodically, there would be something odd left lying around near where someone had vanished. Creepy things like weird-looking dolls made from wood that never failed to rattle people. There wasn't anyone around who people thought was capable of anything like this. And since one of the families in town had experienced something like this before in a different town many years ago, they suspected there was some kind of curse put on them. Especially after a few people who kept track of all the strange events realized all of them took place on a full moon. Harland took a sip of his coffee before he continued. It all came to a head when there was a terrible accident at the town lumber mill. A fire that no one could figure out how it started. Several employees died and many others were badly injured, and the lumber mill, which was one of the biggest employers around, closed. That was when the paranoia that had been lingering under the surface boiled over. So when some people from town found an abandoned cottage in the woods near Blackthorn Creek with weird symbols written on the walls and the floor, they grabbed their torches, set the place on fire, and watched it burn. According to the crowd, the cabin took forever to burn, much longer than the people thought possible. But once it did finally burn down, they took the ashes and buried them deep in the woods and didn't mark the location, hoping that would be the end of it. And, for a while, that seemed to be the case. But every once in a while, something would happen that would make people in town look over their shoulders. Nothing major, a bit of bad luck in the form of an injury, or some suspicious noises outside the house after dark, and perhaps some scratch marks on the door or the wall. But ever since then, people would be very careful what they did, especially if there was a full moon. Then he paused for a moment to look at the fire, which was crackling pleasantly in the fireplace. I couldn't tell you how old I was when I first heard the story, but I remember exactly how I felt. Confused. Because the story, although creepy and entertaining, didn't quite make sense to me. And I said something to Uncle George about that, and he laughed. Then he said he agreed that the story was long on atmosphere and short on believability. That's when he got serious. Told me that although the story was a bit of fiction, he never doubted that it came from somewhere, and there was indeed something going on out in the woods. Then he added that it didn't matter how old I was, where I was, who I was with, or what was going on. If I got a terrible feeling, I should listen to it. And I've listened to every feeling I've gotten since then. It's never served me wrong. He looked around at us, slowly taking us all in. I've never quite believed that story, but I will be the last person to deny that in all the years I've been out here, I've felt things on occasion. Things that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And on even fewer occasions, I've seen things. Fleeting glances at things that I wasn't sure I saw. But there was one time when I not only felt something, I heard something. The air in the ranger station was completely still. I briefly glanced at my colleagues as Harlan said this, and they met my glance, and I could see they were just as gripped by the story as I was. It was about 30 years ago, Harlan explained. I was just starting out as a park ranger. This was back in the early 90s when technology and life in general was very different from today. I'd grown up out in nature, and I'd seen plenty of scary movies, and more importantly, I'd grown up hearing countless spooky stories about what may or may not have been lurking outside, so I wasn't exactly sheltered. But there are some things you're never truly prepared to experience. The fire in the fireplace popped in the grate, but we were so absorbed in Harlan's story we barely noticed. There was plenty of wood in the fire, so we didn't have to worry about that for a while. It was early November. Halloween had just ended, which made everyone sad because I remember that year was a particularly fun one. Darkness seemed to be arriving earlier and earlier, so I was barely halfway through my shift when the sun was going down. I remember it had been raining almost every day, so the days were all gray and cloudy, and the nights were damp with plenty of fog. But that particular morning was dry. All the leaves that had clung to the trees had been scattered by the winds and rain, so they lay there on the grass, all damp and torn. My job on that particular day was to go around raking them up so they didn't completely cover the trails and paths that people walked on. The chill in the air was that chill only late fall can bring. The dampness that seems to soak into your skin and never let go. I had just finished one section of the park and was walking back to my truck when the rain started up again, and it did so with a fury. So I hustled it to the truck, got inside, and headed back to the ranger station where I planned to spend the rest of the evening. And since it was a quiet night at the ranger station, it looked like I would get what I wanted. I was used to working the late shift by myself as the night supervisor, so being alone didn't bother me. I'd always been a quiet type who liked to read a book, so it was an ideal situation for me. Except for that night. Harlan took a deep breath before he continued. Because Halloween was over and the rain had been steady, the park hadn't received as many visitors as it usually had. But I was inside the ranger station, this ranger station in fact, which was just as cozy and warm as you see it now. Plus, now that I was done with my task, I was free to read a book, so I wasted no time in curling up by the fire with a paperback. I'd spent many a shift this way, and it was fine by me. I'd happily read a book on a nice day, but on a rainy day, nothing better. Eventually, I started to get hungry. Since I just brought a light snack, but turned out to be craving something bigger, I decided to order pizza. There was a local joint that was only a few minutes away that often delivered out here back then, so I didn't hesitate to give them a call. I ordered a medium pizza with pepperoni, and as I hung up, the rain started to really pound heavily on the station roof. I knew from experience that the rain pounding on the station roof could truly be loud. It seemed to surround you from all sides. But by the time the headlights pulled into the driveway, the rain had faded to a slight drizzle. But I could see the grass leading up here was pretty well soaked, and there were numerous small puddles on both the grass and the road. The trees were swaying along with the winds, and the sky was getting darker by the minute as night was settling in. By now, the outdoor lights had started to switch on as the car from the pizza place pulled up in front of the station, its windshield wipers going back and forth as it stopped in front of the entrance. I stood in front of it, under the part of the roof that kept me out of the rain. The driver, a young guy named Derek in his early 20s, got out of the driver's seat and grabbed the pizza from the passenger's side. Derek had delivered here before, and he'd always done a great job. We chit-chatted as I handed him the cash with a generous tip. Then Derek handed me the pizza and was just about to go back to his car before he stopped and stared at something behind me. He paused and said that it would probably sound crazy, but it looked like there was a woman lurking in the woods near the ranger station. We all sat there silently for a moment before Harlan continued. I remember just standing there when he told me. The words sounded almost foreign as Derek said them out loud. My first reaction was that it was impossible, but there was only one way to find out. so I turned behind me to look at where he was pointing. He took another sip of coffee. The cluster of trees he was pointing at was a dense area of tall pine trees. They'd been long gone by now, but back then, there wasn't much in the way of illumination out there, but even I could see there was nothing there. I stood there, the pizza still clutched in my hand, as I waited for anything to happen. But nothing emerged from the woods. I was just about to turn back to Derek when I heard "Get out" from beside me in a hushed voice, clear as could be. I turned around immediately to look at Derek, and without saying a word, I knew he'd heard it too. But while it was creepy as could be, I didn't know for sure what it meant. It didn't come out as an ominous command, more like a warning. But I won't lie, standing there outside, I'd never felt fear like that before. I'd been afraid before, and I'd been afraid after, but not like that. That fear was less like a feeling and more like a part of your body. Like it's always there, and only rarely are you truly aware of it. Sitting there watching Harlan, it was clear that although we were sitting there in the present, he had been immediately transported back to that cold November night. I couldn't have told you how much time passed. May have only been a minute or two. But despite the dwindling light, I thought I could see shapes moving far out in the woods. Very far out. After a moment, you couldn't see anything at all. Then Harlan's voice became quieter. To this day, I have no idea why that sight filled me with so much fear. Just like I also have no idea how I knew it was people. But I did. And I knew it was people, as in more than one. Much more than one. But I had no idea exactly how many. Then, almost as if on cue, I heard the word, now. And it was all the motivation I needed to tell Derek we had to go. He didn't need to be told twice, because we hopped in his car and got out of there as fast as we could. Didn't stop for about 20 miles, and we were far away from the ranger station. By that point, the fear had slowly faded, and I was starving, so we split the pizza while debating what to tell my superiors. I eventually decided to say that I was feeling really sick and want to see a doctor I knew. Harlan chuckled, but it didn't take long for me to realize my excuse for leaving would be completely forgotten. Because after I left, the ranger station had been broken into by a group of people. The security camera we had at the time saw all 6 of them, dressed from head to toe in black, break right through the front door. Just crashed right through it. Then, minutes later, they came back out without taking anything and vanished into the trees. The cops thoroughly searched the area, but found nothing. I found out when I called my superiors to tell them I had to leave because I was feeling horrible. From the time on the camera, they appeared to arrive within mere minutes after I left with Derek. We all exchanged a look as the fact that he really was talking about this ranger station dawned on us. Sitting across from us, Harlan didn't say anything, but I knew he could tell the 3 of us were seeing the ranger station like never before. The conclusion the cops reached, Harlan eventually said, is that it was a gang of professional criminals who saw the ranger station and decided to see what they could find. Since there was apparently nothing they could make use of, they split. And every year on that day, since that happened, I've taken a single flower and left it by where Derek says he saw someone that night. I've never seen or heard that voice since that night. But on occasion, I've felt the presence of something or someone watching me, and not in an unpleasant way. But that's the thing about the woods. There's no telling what you may find in them. And if you're really paying attention, it's amazing what you can learn. Like I learned that November night, all those years ago, was a full moon. The clouds just happened to obscure it out here. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comment section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.